factoring is the fastest method for solving a quadratic, but it doesn't always work. So when it works, that's great. When it doesn't, you need other options. Completing the square is the option we looked at yesterday, and it would work every time. You do have to make sure that you have a coefficient of 1 before you can use it. The second option that always works is the quadratic formula. You are going to have to know this. So go ahead and write it down. You used it a lot back in Algebra 2, but now we're kind of to the point where it's going to come up often enough that it is something that you really do need to know. It is based off a quadratic equation in standard form, so ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you have to make sure it's set equal to 0. A is just your x squared coefficient, b is your x coefficient, and c is your constant. So let's look at some. It's a quadratic, so first step for a quadratic is always to set it equal to 0. So if I bring over my 2, you could check, can we do box method for this? Is there anything that multiplies to 2 and adds to -4? No, so that doesn't work. So you could do completing the square, or we can do the quadratic formula from today. So quadratic formula, x equals opposite of b, so the opposite of -4, b4, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All over 2a. The difference in Algebra 2, you were able to just plug all this in your calculator and give a decimal answer. I want exact answers, so that means radicals. So we're not going to just put everything in our calculator, we are going to work it out. So we have 4 plus or minus. Okay, -4 squared is 16. 4 times 1 times 2 would give me an 8. So I get 4 plus or minus the square root of 8 all over 2. Yep. Got to break down that 8. So we could think of that as a 4 and a 2. So square root of 4 is 2. That comes out.
Who decided to make the problem?
Like this formula. Why?
If it works.
How?
It actually, I could show you. It comes from completing the square. If you use a, b, and c in completing the square and do that, that's where this formula came from.
Just 2 radicals, 2 plus minus 2. That's the actual problem. Did the show only work?
Not necessarily. Okay, so first step is to set these equal to 0. Unlike factoring and completing the square, it does not matter if your x squared term is positive or negative. So you could, when I was walking around, most of you took everything over to the left because that's kind of our habit. If you just brought over your 2x squared, that works too. You could do a quick check. Can you do box method here? No, if you tried, and you know on a test or quiz, if I had all the problems mixed together, you would probably try box method first. You're looking for two things that multiply -8 and add to -1. So it doesn't factor nicely. We have to do either completing the square or the quadratic formula. So opposite of b, my a is my 2 here, my b is my -1, my c is my 4. So opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you get 1 minus 32 over 4. That gives me a negative 31. If you have a negative under your radical, what do you have to do? We'll add an I. Would it be okay to leave my answer like this? What do I want you to do? Write it in standard form, simplify. So just split them apart. If it's an imaginary, you need to go ahead and separate the two.
When does it change to two?
It's not under square root. It's square root. That's just what it is. Right.
No, that's what yeah, I'll put it in here. Yeah.
All right. Any questions there? Okay, so C, I'm going to add over my 5.
Would that be two problems? Would this be two problems? Answers?
Yeah.
It would be two answers?
Yes, it's the 1/4 plus that and the 1/4.
No, I'm talking about C.
Oh, you should, all of these quadratics, you should get 2 answers. So here my A is -3, my B is -2, and my C is 5. So opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay, so I get 4 minus, when you multiply those you get -60, so that makes plus 60. What is the square root of 64? Okay, can I simplify this? Yeah, those are like terms. So 2 plus 8 would be 10, divided by -6, so -5/3. 2 minus 8 is -6, divided by -6 would be +1. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the answers that we've seen. On A, I got 2 different real numbers. There's no i's, and I still had something under a radical. On B, what caused me to have an I in this problem? The negative under the radical. Okay, on C, I didn't have any i's, and I also don't have any radicals
You had a
left.
perfect square.
Because you had a perfect square when you did the part under the radical. What if I gave you this one? When we do our quadratic, opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. I get 16 minus 16 under my radical. What happens there? The cancels. So what you really have is -4 plus or minus 0 over 2. -4 plus 0 divided by 2 is -2. -4 minus 0 divided by 2 is -2. So this is like a multiplicity of 2. So what caused me to only get one answer that showed up twice? On this one, yes. Could have. So what made this only get one unique number for a solution? There's a 0 under the radical. Okay, so we've seen if you get a positive under the radical, you get a real solution. If you get a negative under the radical, you get an imaginary. If you get 0 under the radical, we only get one solution. That's what's called the discriminant. Sometimes I don't care what the solutions are, I just need to know what they're going to look like. So if I just ask you to use the discriminant to determine the types of solutions, all you have to do, you could do the full quadratic formula, but you don't need to. All you really need to do is that b squared minus 4ac. If that is positive, you're going to get two different real solutions, because you'll have something plus and something minus. If it's a negative, that's when we got our two imaginary solutions. And when it was 0, we just got one solution that was repeated. So
That's
you,
right
I would jot that down, yes. You can abbreviate if you need to, but we may also talk about rational versus irrational solutions. So if you do this discriminant and you get a positive answer, okay, that means you're going to have the square root of a positive number, so we get our real solutions. Rational solutions are just the nice, pretty ones, the fractions. So rational would be like this one right here. Irrational is when you still have radicals in it, so like this one here. What was the difference? What made it rational or irrational?
Rational is the perfect square.
Yes. So if I asked you to classify those solutions as rational or irrational, it'll be rational if it's a perfect square. It will be irrational if it's not a perfect square. So we can classify these things as real or imaginary, also rational and irrational, if you would be able to get rid of that radical altogether. Let's look at a sample problem. I'm going to slightly change these directions. I just want to classify the solutions. So when I'm looking at this, I could do the full quadratic. I could realize if I just care about the solutions and classifying them, all I need is the portion under the radicals. So we just need to find b squared minus 4ac. So that'd be negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1. And so my discriminant is 13. That's positive. So what does that tell me? Two real. Okay, will it be rational or irrational? Irrational, because you can't do the square root of 13. I do b squared minus 4ac classify this?
Should, since you subtracted it over, shouldn't that be on the same?
It is now when I subtract it over, but my coefficient is a negative. When you do the b squared minus 4ac.
You put it equally to 560. Oh, you added them.
Yeah, that was my, that's what I had was. So, real or imaginary? Real, 1 or 2? You're gonna get 2. The only time you get one answer is if that's a 0 right there. So we have 2 real. Will it be rational or irrational? Rational. You can do the square root of that. You guys try C. It becomes a negative, that's your b value. So b squared minus 4ac. And you get negative 8. So that's my discriminant. So it's a negative, that tells me we have 2 imaginary solutions. If I ask for real or for rational or irrational, which one would this be? Irrational, because you can't do the square root of 8. Alright, any questions about the discriminant or the quadratic formula? Okay, one last thing we're going to look at. We need to be able to solve equations for a given variable. So this is the last type of problem. We'll do these until I feel like you've got them, so 3 or 4, and then I'll give you guys time to work on homework. I want to solve this for d. If you can't tell by the way it's typed, this is pi d squared over 4. If you wanted to get the d by itself, first of all, I have multiple variables in here, so am I going to get just a number answer? No, you're just going to get an expression that still has variables in it. So we're just manipulating this equation. What would be your first step? Before that, what do we have to do now? Pi is multiply with these, so we're going to divide it. So then you add a square root. Now, anytime you add a square root, you need plus and minus. Okay, can I do the square root of, so if I look at the 4a, you could simplify this a little bit. It's like the square root of the top and the bottom. What's the square root of 4? 2. So you can pull out a 2. Can you leave a radical in the denominator? So you can multiply by the square root of pi on top and bottom. So you get 2 square root of pi times a over pi. So these answers are not necessarily going to be pretty, but you're just manipulating it to get the d portion by itself. What questions do you have right there? Let's try a few more and make sure we've got this before we move on. If I wanted to get rid of the 1/3 in front, what could you do? So let's just take each side times. Those drop, so I get 3b equals pi r squared h. R is being multiplied with both the pi and the h, so I'm going to just divide by both of them. Now what?
So, plus or minus.
Square root plus and minus, so I get r equals plus and minus. This is the square root of 3b over the square root of pi h. Can you leave it like this? What do you? Unfortunately not. Just multiply by the square root of pi h on top and bottom. I'm gonna put a couple up here for you guys to try, and then we should be at a stopping point. So the first one, you would add your 3b squared over. You can put it at the beginning or end, doesn't matter. You do your square root and you do the plus or minus. Because these are added, it's two terms, you can't do the square root of each one individually. So you can't pull anything out. This is just your final answer. B, what did you do first? Multiply by 5. Then divide by our m.
Wow. Yeah. You should become English totally.
Yeah.
Multiply by n, and then then plus or minus bracket 5h over n.
Good. Are we okay with these?
Let's go.
All right. So there is a math Excel assignment for today. I think it's like 9 questions, and you've got quite a bit of time to work right now. So let me know if